Because of that change in wind direction, we've lost the northerly wind, that chilly northerly that we've seen throughout the week. We're switching to milder westerlies, and that change really through the rest of today is marked by thickening cloud coming in from the Atlantic. Still some sunshine there for East Anglia and the southeast, and even as the clouds arrive, still some breaks in the clouds. So not extensive cloud by any means in central and eastern parts of the UK. Thicker cloud towards the northwest will give some spots of rain and drizzle, particularly over hills and coasts, and all parts seeing temperatures a degree or so higher compared to yesterday, a little milder. However, through the evening, much of the UK looking fine for bonfire night, decent weather for fireworks displays, away from western Scotland where the rain tends to become more persistent, especially after midnight. The wind picks up after midnight as well. And for most, it's a much milder night compared to recent nights, with temperatures staying well above freezing. That breeze with us as we start off Saturday, and it's going to turn increasingly wet for northern and western Scotland. That rain sinking into Northern Ireland, then northern England, much of Wales by lunchtime. It does sink south fairly quickly, so that will mitigate against any kind of impacts from the rainfall, but it will be a wet and windy day in many places, and the wind pushing blustery showers into Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of Saturday. But really the rain doesn't reach East Anglia in the southeast until the evening, and even as it does, it's a weak feature, so just a few spots of rain and drizzle as it sinks away into the continent. Then it turns very windy overnight in northern Scotland, risk of big waves and coastal impacts as well. Sunday is a windy but drier day.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott. Lots coming up today at lunchtime. After a dreadful week for Westminster, we're asking a polling expert, how much do voters really care? Plus, I've got an exclusive interview with singer-songwriter Moby about whether COP26 is really going to achieve anything. And we're talking jobs for prisoners with two ex-prison officers. But first, it's the news.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 12 o'clock.
The Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi has admitted the government made a mistake when it combined a vote on disciplinary procedures with a Tory MP's suspension. Former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson has now officially resigned. He faced a 30-day ban for breaching lobbying rules, but a Conservative vote blocked the recommendation before a U-turn was made. Mr Zahawi says the government can't be complacent in the face of perceptions of sleaze.
Conflating that with a specific case of Owen Paterson was a mistake. I think to reflect within 24 hours and by the morning have the leader of the House, and I take collective responsibility for this, by the way, to come forward and say, look, we made a mistake to conflate the two, the really important one to get right, and we need cross-party negotiation on this, and I urge all my fellow parliamentarians from whichever party to shed their politics. Let's not play tit for tat. Let's get this right for generations and actually for your viewers, for the country, to have confidence in the system of scrutiny of MPs.
Yorkshire County Cricket Club chairman Roger Hutton has resigned with immediate effect. He's now calling on the executive board to follow suit. It's after the club was suspended from hosting England matches in the wake of Azim Rafiq's racism allegations. Hutton says frustration with board members and senior management led to his decision. Former England cricketer Monty Panesar told GB News it was right for him to go.
He is held accountable and responsible for the cultural change that was required, and he failed to do that. And he's obviously apologized that he was unable to persuade the rest of the sort of board members because they are unwilling to make them sort of changes. And I think unfortunately he had to resign.
A record-breaking 853 migrants crossed the English Channel on Wednesday. The Home Office confirmed the number, which tops the previous daily record of 828 set in August. Earlier, French authorities said 2 migrants died this week while attempting the journey. More than 21,000 migrants have now made the crossing to the UK this year, double the total for 2020. British Airways parent company IAG has warned it's likely to make a £2.5 billion loss this year. BA says passenger numbers are starting to improve but remain well below pre-pandemic levels. The airline says the reopening of transatlantic travel will help the company return to profit. It plans to fly about 60% of its pre-pandemic capacity in the current quarter. An alleged terrorist accused of fatally stabbing Sir David Amess will enter pleas next month. Ali Harbi Ali, charged with murdering the Conservative MP last month, appeared at the Old Bailey for a preliminary hearing via video link. A provisional trial date has already been set for the 7th of March next year. Prince Andrew's lawyers are expected to argue for the dismissal of Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit at a hearing on January the 4th. A US judge issued the schedule a day after saying a trial date is likely to fall between September and December next year. Giuffre claims the Duke of York sexually abused her when she was 17. He categorically denies the allegation. Brexit Minister Lord Frost will meet one of Brussels' top officials later to address disputes over the Northern Ireland Protocol and fishing rights. It follows a meeting with the French Europe Minister Clément Beaune in Paris yesterday. The diplomatic storm was triggered by a feud over licences for French vessels operating in UK waters. Earlier this week, a Scottish trawler caught up in the row was released by French authorities after being held for 6 days. The Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi has admitted the government made a mistake when it combined a vote on disciplinary procedures with a Tory MP's suspension. Former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson has now officially resigned. That's our top story. And we'll have more news in half an hour, but for now, it's back to Isabel Oakeshott.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, an MP given a suspended prison sentence for threatening to throw acid at another woman. Another who used his position to pocket hundreds of thousands of pounds lobbying for companies. The Prime Minister trying to dismantle the Standards Committee that keeps them all honest and sacking MPs who disagree with him. What on earth has happened to our once proud Parliament? And the COP26 circus continues. But what's it really going to achieve? Has it been a gigantic waste of time? I'll be speaking to superstar singer-songwriter Moby, who's passionate about the climate change agenda, but thinks that something very wrong at COP. And we'll have the next instalment of my series of very special interviews, The Cause, where we talk to people about a campaign or charity that matters to them. Today, I'm going to be interviewing 2 ex-prison officers who help ex-cons get jobs so that they don't simply reoffend and then right up back where they started, in jail. And as always, I want you to give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. What on earth has become of our once proud Parliament? What a dreadful week it's been for politicians. Now look, they've always had a pretty bad reputation, but this week we have sunk to a whole new low. It really feels as if we have sunk new depths. We've had a Labour MP who was sentenced to 10 weeks in prison, albeit a suspended sentence, and she was also given 200 hours of community service after threatening to attack another woman with acid. She also threatened to send naked pictures of her victim to the victim's daughters. Now, you and I might have thought that that would be a sackable offence, but no, Claudia Webb is still the MP for Leicester East, sitting now as an independent after her party threw her out. At the same time, we've learned that another MP, the Tory Owen Paterson, we've heard a lot about him this week, he pocketed hundreds of thousands of pounds, that's on top of his MP salary, for companies that he repeatedly lobbied for in Parliament. A very, very serious breach of the rules there. But when his actions were investigated and he was given a 30-day suspension from the House of Commons, so a very, very serious sanction, Prime Minister Boris Johnson tried to overturn that ruling, and he went further. Not only did he try to overturn it, he tried to get his MPs to vote to dismantle the Standards Committee that is supposed to keep MPs honest. And you know what? That isn't all. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson may face a new investigation over the luxury refurbishment of his Downing Street flat. Yep, you might remember that gold wallpaper cost £840 a roll. Luckily for Boris, someone else paid for it. And yet, the Tories are still enjoying generally a huge poll lead. What on earth is going on? Well, with me to discuss whether any of this is beginning finally to cut through to voters and resonate with them, I've got Joe Twyman of Delta Poll. Joe, thank you for joining us. It seems incredible to me observing this extraordinary level of Tory sleaze that by and large, they're still riding high in the polls. I believe, and you can tell us more, that the poll lead is narrowing a bit, but they seem to be impervious to all of this. What's going on?
Well, firstly, it's too soon to know exactly what impact these latest events will have on the polls because there hasn't been time for the polls to take account of those events. But what we have seen over the last few weeks and indeed last couple of months is a narrowing of the lead, and now consistently the Conservatives have around between sort of 5 and 8 point lead over Labour. So the question is, what is going on, and where will things go from here? It's really important when looking at voting intention polls to look at the long-term trends rather than just the short-term fluctuations. And over the last year or so, we have had various events that have not played well with the public. Most notably, for instance, Dominic Cummings and his Barnard Castle incident. That was an egregious breach of faith that the public certainly didn't enjoy hearing about at all, particularly during the height of a pandemic. But did that have a long-term impact on the polls? I think it's very unlikely that it did. And certainly, if you were to look at the counterfactual, if you were to say, imagine that Dominic Cummings hadn't made any announcement about Barnard Castle, would the polls be significantly different from where they are now? I don't think they would. And so when it comes to the latest events, we have to think, is this a turning point in public opinion, or is it a talking point? And my sense is that it's probably the latter. We've seen events such as this in the past, and it's rare that they do have in terms of individual events, it's rare they do have a large impact, particularly when it comes to what many people out there will perceive as a more technical argument. Now, of course, we can discuss what this represents in terms of honesty and sleaze with regards to Owen Paterson. But the fact is, it's a matter of parliamentary procedure, and it doesn't really affect people in the same way, or at least is not perceived to affect people in the same way as other events. It's not easily understandable, like a sex scandal or someone paying for a duck house with their expenses, but it's at the same time quite a complicated thing. So I imagine that on its own it probably won't have an impact, but the gradual cumulative effect of all these events could have a longer term impact of the kind we saw in the 1990s with John Major's government and the sleaze that
Yes.
dogged his administration.
Indeed, in a sense, the Conservative Party leadership are probably breathing something of a sigh of relief as this week draws to a close, aren't they? Because two things have gone in their favour. Number one, Owen Paterson resigned, so he's sort of taken the heat out of all of that. And number two, Labour have got its own problems with Claudia Webb. In terms of how voters see all of this, do you think they're left just sort of thinking a plague on all your houses? Are you picking up increasing voter apathy, people not really being particularly keen on any of the parties?
That's certainly a trend that we've seen over the last 20 years, and one that has accelerated a disconnect from traditional party politics and a de-alignment from people identifying with particular political parties. But that's a long-term trend. Now, that has been helped in part by really big events that were turning points. And so if we think about the cumulative effect of sleaze and Black Wednesday for John Major in the 1990s, if we think about the Iraq War for Tony Blair's government in the 2000s, and if we think about tuition fees and the issues for the Lib Dems around that after 2010, we see they have been turning points that have affected particular parties. But actually, the things more recently that have had a real effect have affected all parties, and that's things like the financial crisis in 2008, and more recently the expenses crisis following that, where it really was seen as a plague on all your houses, and that helps, at least to a degree, explain why trust and support for specific political parties has fallen. But it's worth keeping in mind that this is not exactly a new phenomenon. If we think back to 1834 and the fire in the Houses of Parliament that almost burnt the building to the ground, on the other side of the Thames, the public did gather to cheer. So perhaps we can overstate the degree of deference from the past.
Joe, as the dust begins to settle, fortunately, we appear to be gradually emerging from the pandemic. Are voters generally still fairly happy in a way with the way the government handled the pandemic, the number one issue that's affected all our lives for the last near enough 2 years?
Well, it's become more party aligned in recent months. And so, in other words, if you're a Conservative supporter, you're more likely to think that, yes, the government has handled it well. And if you're a Labour supporter, you think the opposite. But overall, the general feeling is, yes, it's a positive thing. And that is due in no small part to the success of the vaccine programme. Up until the end of last year, for example, the government was beginning to do really quite badly in terms of perceptions of whether they were doing a good or a bad job when it came to the pandemic. But since the new year, since the perceived successful rollout of the vaccine programme, we have seen those numbers climb. So my sense is that will be the case.
Thank you so much for that, Joe from Delta Poll. That's Joe Twyman there. Now, we all know that it's one rule for us and one rule for them. And I've been wondering how all of this looks relative to any kind of normal workplace, the way that MPs are disciplined and held to account. I'm joined now by an employment law expert, Rebecca Thornley-Gibson, who is a partner at city law firm DMH Stallard. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. I'm wondering how this looks from a sort of outsider's point of view. You, as an employment law expert, looking at the way the Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons, conducts his business. We have here Owen Paterson, a man who's been an MP or had been an MP for 26 years, who's very abruptly lost his job. What do you make of the way all of this has been handled from a sort of normal employment law perspective?
Yes, good afternoon, Isabel. MPs obviously aren't employees, but there is an analogous situation, I think, that you can look at here. And in the workplace, there are two things that you would expect with investigations and disciplinaries. One is a degree of consistency and clarity, and the other, perhaps going back to the actual issues as to why there needs to be a review of the House of Commons Code of Conduct issues, is that you would normally expect a right of appeal from any decision that is made where a sanction is the outcome of that decision. I was thinking it was a little bit like the salesperson who the sales director comes in and says, I'm sorry, but I don't want that particular salesperson disciplined on the basis that they're my best salesperson. So can we flex the rules for this particular individual? And that does happen in employment. It's unfair, and it would generally be found to undermine the credibility of that employer if that was to happen. But I think the fact that Owen Paterson has got caught up in this is really quite unsavoury from the credibility point of view. In the workplace, other employees, if they saw this, would say this is simply not fair. You've changed the goalposts. It is one rule for one and one rule for another.
Yes,
so
indeed.
it certainly isn't something that a good workplace would be operating.
And I'm wondering whether, in other circumstances, what's happened to Owen Paterson would give him rise for a claim for constructive dismissal. I mean, a lot of our viewers will have very little sympathy for him. Effectively, he was accused of gross misconduct, and that was fairly well substantiated. But then all the goalposts were moved. He didn't have any right of appeal. It seemed that due process was not followed in this case. If he had come to you for advice in a normal workplace situation, would you be advising him to bring a claim?
Yes, there is certainly something here, not perhaps so much the fact that the Code of Conduct policy, the Standards Committee policy, was necessarily something that he didn't know about. He did know how it works. It's just that in this situation, it didn't work quite as he wanted to. So there probably wouldn't be a constructive dismissal in that alone. What there probably would be a constructive dismissal in is the fact that he has been perhaps an unintended political pawn over the last 48 hours or so. And his name has been very much sullied with the relatively cat-handed way in which the government has dealt with the conduct review. So that is probably more likely to be where he would hang his hat on a constructive dismissal claim if he was an employee. The fact that the employer has got it so fundamentally wrong in carrying out that potential review and changing the goalposts midway through a disciplinary process.
Indeed. As we all know, unfortunately, Parliament and MPs don't stick to the same normal procedures as the rest of us. Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. Now, next on the briefing, I will be talking with global star Moby about climate action and whether COP26 is a gigantic waste of time. See you in a few moments. You're
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello again. Now, you're probably hoping the whole COP26 circus has gone away. Joe Biden's left and Boris Johnson and his crew are back in London. Even Greta Thunberg has said no more blah, blah, blah. The bad news, I'm sorry to tell you, is that there will be plenty more blah, blah, blah. A whole other week of it, sorry. The question is, has it all been a complete waste of time? Their big agreement this week seems to have been all about stopping coal power generation. That's the one tangible thing that's come out of this. 40 countries have signed up to that. Sadly, China wasn't one of them. And in fact, the president of China, as we all know, didn't bother turning up. And it's a bit of a problem, really. Did you know that last year China built the equivalent of a great big coal power station every single week? So a treaty that 40 countries have signed up to not to build anymore doesn't really look so good when you consider what China is doing. The question is, have they all been missing the point? Well, one person who's actually passionate about the climate change agenda but still thinks that COP26 has been a big wasted opportunity is singer-songwriter Moby. He sold 20 million records worldwide. His album Play was a huge global hit. And I've been talking to him about what has gone wrong with COP and why he thinks it's been a wasted opportunity.
Why aren't you at COP26? Were you tempted at all to come over for that?
On one hand, I think it's great that so much attention is being placed on climate change. But if I'm being completely honest and potentially not diplomatic, I don't see much changing in the way of policy, you know, in terms of subsidies, in terms of energy production, in terms of agriculture. So I worked with two organizations, Humane Society International and the Plant-Based Treaty, to create information around COP26, but I just didn't feel like my presence there was necessarily going to add anything. Very broadly speaking, as you know, the three leading causes of climate change are oil and gas, or petrol and gas production, coal production, and animal agriculture, or meat and dairy production. Like, those are the three main drivers. And also, as you know very well, you've written on this subject, we need to end those three industries.
Indeed. So let's pick up on the issue of animal agriculture, because there's really been very little talked about it at this big conference. We've heard a lot about coal power and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, coal power is disappearing largely here in its old-fashioned form anyway. But as you say, animal agriculture is a massive contributor, and yet nobody at COP26, precious few people, are talking about it.
Yeah, that's why I'm working with Humane Society International and the Plant-Based Treaty to try and draw attention to that. And it just makes me think of a conversation I had with Al Gore a while ago. And I was talking to Vice President Gore, and I was asking him why he didn't draw more attention to the role of animal agriculture in climate change. And he was so honest. And he said, basically, that meat and dairy production is the real inconvenient truth when it comes to climate change. It's because it touches family, it touches history, it touches tradition. People are so attached to traditional food, and it's very, as we know, it's very hard to ask people to consider traditional diets in an approach to climate change. Of course, we have to do that. There's no way to deal with climate change seriously and continue to produce meat and dairy, and especially not continuing to subsidize meat and dairy production. Like, that simply needs to end. And it's not necessarily as you know, it's not in the realm of opinion. Like, having opinions about meat and dairy production, we've moved past that. This is simple fact. It's the third leading cause of climate change, and it needs to be ended.
So here in the UK, about a week ago, our chief scientific officer said that everybody could do their bit by reducing the amount of meat they eat. Now, you wouldn't have thought that that was that controversial, but it caused a huge political backlash when he said it. And virtually the next day, our Chancellor immediately did a round of interviews. He did that round of interviews from a meat market, and said that he wasn't telling anyone to eat less meat. He said literally those words, "I'm not telling anyone to eat less meat." I mean, what do you make of comments like that from our second most senior political leader?
Every politician knows that we can no longer produce meat and dairy and deal with climate change. But they also know that if they say that publicly, they'll lose their next election. So we end up in this horrible, paradox where people know the truth. The politicians know the truth. You cannot produce meat and dairy and effectively deal with climate change, but they won't say it because they're looking for political expediency, so they get reelected. But the problem is, it makes me think of and maybe this is going to sound a little bit dramatic, but I hope it isn't, is like, if I'm talking to someone who's smoking crack, I can't politely say to them like, "Oh, you don't need to stop smoking crack. Just keep smoking crack and you're going to have a great, nice, long life." The only way you can save them is to say to them like, "Hey, you need to stop smoking crack." And that might be a very hard thing for that crack addict to hear, but it's the only truth that will save them. The same way as we know, we need to tell people very clearly, you cannot keep producing oil, gas, coal, and meat and dairy and expect to have a climate that will support human life within the next 100 years.
So do you think then politicians like Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor, should be brave enough to actually say, you cannot keep the equivalent of smoking crack?
It's very hard for me because I'm not a politician. I'm just a musician. It's very easy for me to say things without consequences. So I try not to be too judgmental. But when we look at the severity of the issue, this is really in all of human history, this is the first time that there's an issue that affects every person on the planet, global south, global north, developing nations, first world nations. It affects everyone. And if we don't deal with it, as you know, and I apologize for stating the obvious, if we don't deal with it, the earth will no longer support human life. And it's funny that sounds so dramatic, like that sounds like the premise for a Tom Cruise science fiction movie, but sadly, tragically, it's the truth. So it's such an abdication of responsibility when a politician is unwilling to be honest about what they know.
Right. And you really invest in this whole issue, don't you? To the point that you have "vegan for life" tattooed on your neck. Can we see it? I can just about see it. There you go. That had to hurt, didn't it?
It hurt, but I mean, I've been an animal rights activist and a vegan for 34 years. But the tricky thing about being such a public vegan is a lot of people will then dismiss what I say about animal agriculture. And that's why I'd almost say, like, in a way, don't listen to me, listen to the scientists, listen to the climate scientists, most of whom are not vegan, but they're saying very clearly, you can't produce meat and dairy and have a sustainable climate. It's just a simple fact. Like, and it's hard because I kind of wish in a way that I didn't have a giant vegan tattoo on my neck, because that way someone watching right now wouldn't have an easy way to dismiss what I'm saying.
When did you get it done?
Well, I'm 56 years old now, and I got this done 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, because of course, there's no better time to get giant face and neck tattoos than when you're 54 years old.
And what about our Prime Minister Boris Johnson? What do you think of him?
I mean, I don't know. When he was first elected, people were sort of comparing him to Trump. And I felt like, and I'm not saying this that I'm pro Boris Johnson, but I feel like it was deeply unfair to compare him to Trump because, I mean, Trump is like a dim-witted demon and Boris Johnson is just a goofy clown. So I feel like comparing a clown to the devil was a mistake.
Wow. Well, I think Boris Johnson, I'm not sure he'll be entirely flattered by that, but he may take some comfort that he's not the devil.
He's not the devil. He's just a clown.
So just recapping finally then on COP26, do you fear that really because they've ignored or very much sidelined this absolutely pivotal issue, that ultimately it really won't have achieved much and it's just all been a bit of a talking shop, a bit of a junket for a lot of wealthy people?
Well, I mean, we look at past COPs, like COP21, a lot was achieved, but there were no lasting consequences really. Most likely, unfortunately, sadly, COP26 will be like COP21, like a lot of talk, a lot of targets, a lot of great intentions. But the other thing to keep in mind, and I don't want to end on such a depressing note, but the other thing to keep in mind is without Russia, Brazil, India, and China, it's really hard. Like if every European nation embraced COP26 and committed to their pledges and to their targets, it still doesn't involve Russia, India, China, and Brazil. And that means that until we involve every large methane and carbon producing country on the planet, until that happens, the problem will not be seriously addressed.
Well, that was Moby talking about his frustrations with COP26, and I'm sure we've all got many of our own. Now, still to come, it costs over £40,000 a year to keep a prisoner in jail. So isn't there a way to stop them just coming back again after they've been released? I'll be talking to two ex-prison officers about that shortly. But first, it's your news headlines.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. The Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi has admitted the government made a mistake when it combined a vote on disciplinary procedures with a Tory MP's suspension. Former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson has now officially resigned. He faced a 30-day ban for breaching lobbying rules, but a Conservative vote blocked the recommendation before making a U-turn. Yorkshire County Cricket Club chairman Roger Hutton has resigned with immediate effect. He's calling on the executive board to follow. It's after the club was suspended from hosting England matches in the wake of Azim Rafiq's racism allegations. Hutton says frustration with board members and senior management led to his decision. A record-breaking 853 migrants crossed the English Channel on Wednesday. The Home Office confirmed the number, which tops the previous daily record of 828 in August. More than 21,000 migrants have now made the crossing to the UK this year, double the total for 2020. England rugby captain Owen Farrell has tested positive for COVID. It's a major setback for the squad on the eve of their Autumn Nations Series clash with Tonga at Twickenham. No other players have tested positive. I'll be back with a full update at the top of the hour. We'll see you then.
Hello again. More cloud around compared to yesterday, but dry for most and a little milder compared to recent days. The wind direction is changing. Different weather on the way because of that change in wind direction. We've lost the northerly wind, that chilly northerly that we've seen throughout the week. We're switching to milder westerlies, and that change really through the rest of today is marked by thickening cloud coming in from the Atlantic. Still some sunshine there for East Anglia and the southeast, and even as the clouds arrive, still some breaks in the clouds. So not extensive cloud by any means in central and eastern parts of the UK. Thicker cloud towards the northwest will give some spots of rain and drizzle, particularly over hills and coasts, and all parts seeing temperatures a degree or so higher compared to yesterday, a little milder. However, through the evening, much of the UK looking fine for bonfire night, decent weather for fireworks displays, away from western Scotland where the rain tends to become more persistent, especially after midnight. The wind picks up after midnight as well. And for most, it's a much milder night compared to recent nights, with temperatures staying well above freezing. That breeze with us as we start off Saturday, and it's going to turn increasingly wet for northern and western Scotland. That rain sinking into Northern Ireland, then northern England, much of Wales by lunchtime. It does sink south fairly quickly, so that will mitigate against any kind of impacts from the rainfall, but it will be a wet and windy day in many places, and the wind pushing blustery showers into Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of Saturday. But really the rain doesn't reach East Anglia in the southeast until the evening, and even as it does, it's a weak feature, so just a few spots of rain and drizzle as it sinks away into the continent. Then it turns very windy overnight in northern Scotland, risk of big waves and coastal impacts as well. Sunday is a windy but drier day.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, while some people like my earlier guest Moby might think COP26 hasn't achieved much, there's still plenty on the agenda for the remaining week of the conference. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, is in Glasgow for us now. Hi, Tom. How long have you been there now? Almost a week?
Almost a week. I got here on Sunday night. We've been through lots of the conference already. Those first 2 days, of course, with the world leaders, presidents and prime ministers from around the world, although with some notable exceptions. Then, of course, came the finance day with finance ministers talking a lot about how this is all going to be funded. We've had Tree Day, we've had Coal Day. Today is Children and Public Participation Day. And whilst there's been an announcement in terms of education inside COP, what's going on outside COP is quite interesting. There is a protest being led by Greta Thunberg marching down the street of Glasgow, and we're just at the back of it now. It was advertised as 100,000 strong. I've got to say, I've walked past most of it. It doesn't quite feel like it's 100,000 people, but you know what? It's attracted a helicopter that is right up there in the sky looking over the protest. I wonder how environmentally friendly that is. But there are also quite a few different groups. I've seen flags, I've seen Palestinian flags. I saw one flag of the Soviet Union here. Now, if anyone knows anything about the history of the Soviet Union, they know it's not the most environmentally friendly state to have ever existed on the face of this planet. But no, it's an interesting protest here. Environmentalists protesting the environmental conference. Very, very odd. I'm not sure what more they would have wanted world leaders to say, because to my ears, what's gone on in the last 5 days has been pretty on point towards that environmental agenda.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of our viewers will be bewildered at the spectacle of a climate change protest outside a climate change conference. And unfortunately, as far as many of our viewers are concerned, there's still rather a lot more of this to come. What have we got on the agenda next week, Tom? And does your kind of sentence continue? Are you stuck there till the bitter end?
Yes, we'll be sticking around in Glasgow, waiting to see what more comes. We've heard many announcements coming from in terms of global agreements, but also in terms of national policy. And really what's going on through the next week is these individual negotiating teams of various countries, getting down into the detail, into the nitty-gritty of negotiation. And hopefully, by Friday, in their eyes, hopefully, a new global agreement to rival Paris, something that this COP conference becoming a flop, an agreement that will bind many more countries into the world into keeping emissions low enough to halve them by 2030, to keep warming down to 1.5 degrees. It's an audacious task, and of course without China, without Russia at the table, or at least without their leadership at the table, it's going to be very difficult. But maybe by Friday night we'll see that agreement. Maybe the Prime Minister will fly back here, will jet back in to announce some grand agreement on climate change. We'll be sticking with it throughout to bring any developments as they happen.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. My goodness, it's extremely noisy there, and I'm sure you're looking forward to your release. Now, earlier this month, the government announced plans to create 18,000 extra prison places, and they're in the process of building 4 new mega prisons. There's one in the northwest of England, 2 in the southeast, and a new massive one that's already under construction in East Yorkshire. Now, none of this comes cheap. It costs something like 3.5 billion, according to Chancellor Rishi Sunak's spending review. And when you break that down into prison places, every prison place costs about £40,000 a year to run. So that's roughly the same as sending a child to a top private boarding school like Eton. Unfortunately, the outcomes aren't always quite as good as those that you get from those boarding schools. Now, we all want to see criminals locked up and punished. The question is whether that system really works, because what taxpayers don't want is for their money to be wasted, locking up the same people time and time again, which is so often, unfortunately, what happens. Wouldn't it be better if we could get those people back onto the straight and narrow when they come out of prison and get them contributing to society instead of just continuing to be a burden on the state? On The Cause today, I've been looking at how we stop the cycle of reoffending with an organisation called Tempus Novo. Here's a very powerful video about what they do and the impact they have on people's lives.
Tempus Novo has helped me out in a big way. They were the ones that got me the chance of the job, got me the job more or less really. And if it weren't for them, then I don't think I'd have made the changes that I have, because it'd have been hard to find a job with a criminal record.
It's opened doors and given me an opportunity that I otherwise would not have been given.
My life is a lot better. I just don't react the way I used to react. It's like I say, I've learned to just to actually deal with stuff.
I can go home knackered, but I can go home with a smile on my face and provide for my kids. Everyone's happy with me at home. I get so much respect from friends, family, my community, and it's just an awesome feeling.
Now me and my partner Jacqueline, we've got a little girl, Florence. She's 15 months old, she's my world. And I just don't want people going up to her saying, oh, your dad's a druggie, or your dad's like a jailhead. I just want her to be proud of me, like I'm proud of her.
It's changed my life enormously. If I wouldn't be working, then I'd probably be back in prison committing crimes. And that's it really.
So joining me now are Steve Freer and Val Vavros. They're both former senior prison officers from Leeds Prison, and they now work with criminals at the end of their sentences, helping them to get jobs. Thank you so much for coming all the way down to see us, because you're actually based sort of at the prison, aren't you, Steve?
Yes, we are, just outside Leeds Prison.
And Steve, you're both ex-prison officers. You actually left your job as a prison officer to move into this work, basically rehabilitating prisoners, helping them get back on the straight and narrow. Why did you make that decision to leave your day job, as it were?
After having worked in prisons for almost 30 years and seeing a lot of time the same faces come through the door and speaking to the guys, because it was a male prison, asking them the question, why do you waste your life in and out of prison? And the same answer came back, if I could get a job, I wouldn't, but who will touch me with my past? So that's what made us think, well, actually, there is a huge stigma against offenders, people with convictions, in the workplace.
And understandably so. I mean, a lot of employers, when they get CVs through, you know, you're getting many CVs, you've got to find a way to sift through them. If you see that someone's had to declare a criminal record, straight in the bin, isn't it? I mean, Val, what's your perspective on that? You will have seen people going through the system. I think you were coming up to retirement anyway, although you look a bit young for that. But
Thank you.
So you were ready to leave, and you decided as well that there was really good work to be done, actually trying to break this cycle.
Yeah, we saw thousands, and we've spoken to thousands of lads over the years, 30 years we both did in the service. And it was obvious that the thing that was missing, see, the prisons tried to do a lot for lads. They do try the best with accommodation, with the housing, with the families, and education training. And what they tend to do is link education training and employment together. They do a lot for education, a lot for training, but hardly anything for employment.
Right.
Because that is the difficult bit. But
so the education and training bit, is that when they're still inside?
Still inside, yeah.
Right. So, but how vocational is that? Does it lead to anything, or all too often not really?
Not really, if truth be told, because they have to target certain. Because what we do now is try to target people into warehousing and try to get qualifications for that job.
Right.
For when they're released.
Right, right. So they're able to do a bit before their release, or right.
So the prison, we work closely now with Hatfield Prison, which is a big open prison in Doncaster, and together we place people on rottle. So we actually place people while they're still serving in custody, with a view to keeping them in them jobs on release.
Yeah.
That's the difference between us and other organisations. We support them both the employer and the employees, for a minimum of 12 months, and that's the bit that's missing.
I think it's important to point out as well that we don't work with every type of offender.
Right.
We have to keep it real for the employers.
Yes, so you're generally not working with very violent criminals, sex offenders, I'm imagining.
Yeah. Sex offenders, arsonists, terrorists, murderers, but that leaves a large percentage of people to work with, and the majority of the people we work with come from poverty. They've never had a chance, never mind a second chance.
Right.
I think we all agree that we're usually influenced by our immediate surroundings. And if you're brought up, unfortunately, in an area where crime and prison is the norm, then that's how you're gonna grow up, thinking that's absolutely the right way to live your life. But they get to an age. Everybody gets to an age in prison where they start thinking differently. It may be they get married, they might have a child, they may lose a loved one whilst locked up and not be able to get to the funeral. It may be that next time they're in front of the judge it's double figures, but something makes them think differently.
Something clicks.
Yeah, and that's it's usually in the mid-30s.
Right. And what is actually the overall reoffending rate? In my head, I've got a sort of 30 to 40% figure. Is that about right?
For people leaving prison, the national statistics say it's around about 45% return within 12 months.
I mean, this is absolutely shocking, really. If you think about taxpayers' money...
It's unbelievable.
Well, you said it earlier, £40,000 to keep someone in prison for 12 months. It's actually £18 billion the cost to the UK for reoffending.
Yes. And the reason, as you're saying, is that when they come out, there isn't really a better life for them to go to. And I guess for some of these criminals, actually crime has paid. And tell me, you know, those that keep reoffending, they keep coming back to prison, some of our viewers will be thinking, well, maybe prison isn't actually bad enough. Is it a bit too nice in there?
No.
No?
Certainly not.
Right. Why not, Val? I mean, do they hate? If they hated it that much, why would they just come back again?
It's part of their life, and 30 to 40% of people in prisons are purely in prison because they come from poverty. They've been brought up in dysfunctional families. They've never had an opportunity in life, and prison is just part of their life. And unfortunately, that's how it's become. And then when they reach the point where they've said, I've had enough of this, I want something different, there's never been anything there for them until Tempus Novo came along, until we set it up.
So Tempus Novo is the name of it's a charity, isn't it? And that basically means it's Latin, isn't it?
It is for new time.
New time. So it's turning over a new leaf, a new page.
That's it.
And without interventions by a charity such as yours, and I know you're quite a small organisation, you rely on the goodwill of your backers. You don't get much from the government, do you? Get a bit? Or nothing at all? So without your work, for the majority of the clients that you see, what hope would they have of actually getting any kind of job after they leave?
Zero. I think the latest figures we were looking on the way down on the train, is it 4% that are in work 6 weeks after leaving prison?
Yeah.
4%.
4%.
Right. So in terms of the help that you give them, you said you get them into warehousing, that you get them into a work-like environment. Yeah. How good are they at sticking with it? Because that must be quite a challenge for you.
That we found over the 7 years that Tempus Novo's been in operation, that actually, because they thought that they never would get a chance, when they do, they grab it with both hands.
Right.
And they're actually harder working and more loyal than the average worker that would come through a normal recruitment agency.
Yeah. The retention rate for the people that we've worked with, and we've now placed 567, I think it is, into work.
567. Have you worked out how much that saved the taxpayer?
Absolute fortune.
Yeah.
Absolute fortune.
Because they're not just
Tens
going
of
back
millions.
in and out.
Yeah, and then out of the 567, this is fact because we've got access to prison systems. We know for a fact that only 27 of those 567 have actually returned to custody,
well,
which is less than 5%.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic rate. And it changes their lives.
It's intergenerational, Isabel.
Is there still a nervousness amongst employers, or are you beginning to see that
not
change?
at all.
Not at all.
We've got employers knocking on our door now, big international leading brands that want to work with us. I've got to give a shout out for Clipper Logistics in Leeds.
Clipper Logistics, who are they and what do they do? Very quickly.
So they are a warehousing operation, 650 million. Started in Leeds, one man and a van. It's now several thousand men and several wagons.
And some ex-prisoners.
And, about 250 ex-prisoners.
And they've proved
and they've embraced it as a
model
business.
employees.
Yes. And it's going absolutely fantastic with them.
Oh, well, listen, thank you so much for the work you do at Tempus Novo. On behalf of the taxpayer, I'm taking the taxpayer spokeswoman even, role here. It's extremely valuable, and I hope you continue to persuade more employers to take on these newly released prisoners. Thank you very much, Val and Steve. Well, that's all I've got time for today. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott. The show is back every weekday from 12 p.m. Up next, it's On the